Have you ever witnessed a child being laughed at just because she dared to believe she was smart? Have you ever sat in a classroom where the silence didn't come from focus, but from prejudice? And have you ever seen a little girl fight back without a single word, but with an answer? That day, in what seemed like a perfectly ordinary classroom in a small American town, something happened, something that not even the person who caused it could have predicted. A teacher, a black girl, and a math problem known as impossible. The teacher didn't shout. He didn't openly insult her, but he placed her at the center of a dangerous game where mockery was hidden behind a polite smile and a deceptively difficult math question. The whole class laughed. The girl stayed silent. No one stood up. Not a single voice spoke out. But what they didn't know was that in that exact moment, something within the girl awakened. Just one night later, without a microphone, without a stage, she made the classroom fall silent, forced the teacher to bow his head, and made all of America ask itself, who is the one that truly needs to be re-educated? In today's video, you won't just hear a math solution. You'll witness a quiet rebellion. You'll understand why silence, when used at the right moment, can be more powerful than any shout. And most importantly, you'll see this. No matter who you are or where you come from, if you believe in your own worth, you can change the way the world sees you. Let's begin this story from a small classroom with a little girl who seemed ordinary and a math problem that seemed impossible. But the result, it stunned the entire country. Her name was Amani, 11 years old, petite, her hair neatly braided. She usually sat at the back of the class with wide, observant eyes. Amani didn't talk much. She rarely raised her hand, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she had grown used to being overlooked. In a school where most students were white, Amani was like a pencil mark on white paper, present but faint. That day the sky was gloomy and math class started as usual. The teacher, Mr. B, was known for being strict, but also for challenging students with hard questions. He walked into class holding a sheet of paper and announced with excitement, "Today we have a special math problem. It's not easy, almost impossible." The class buzzed. A few students straightened up, eager to be chosen. But then Mr. B looked straight toward the back of the room, toward Amani. "You, Amani, come to the board." The whole class turned. A few giggles. Amani paused, unsure whether it was from surprise or because she sensed something wasn't right. She walked to the board while Mr. B smiled and said, "This is the kind of question that even the best students struggle with. But who knows, right?" There was something in his voice that wasn't encouragement. It was a challenge, but not a fair one. Not to motivate, but to prove a point that she wouldn't be able to do it. Amani stood at the board gripping the chalk. The problem was long, full of fractions and variables. No one in the class could solve it instantly. And then as she had just finished reading the problem, a voice from the back of the room piped up, "She's not going to solve that." A few kids laughed. Some watched, waiting for her to stumble. Others were simply curious to see how this quiet girl would handle it. She lowered her head. No protest, no glance for help. Mr. B said nothing, just stood there, waiting. Perhaps he thought this problem would teach her a lesson about limits, about knowing her place in this classroom. But what he didn't understand was this: not every student who is silent is weak. Silence is sometimes how children learn to absorb so they can respond through action. That brief scene revealed something deeper about our education system. When a classroom stops being a place that nurtures confidence and becomes a stage for biases dressed up as challenges or testing abilities, it becomes dangerous. Most dangerous of all is when adults don't even realize who they're hurting. After class, Amani quietly returned to her seat, leaving a clean blackboard behind. She didn't solve the problem, not because she wasn't smart enough, but because no one in that room truly believed she could. But what no one saw was that after school, Amani didn't go straight home. She stopped by the library, borrowed 3 math books, and stepped onto a path no one expected. Because sometimes, right in the moments we're laughed at, a quiet revolution begins. Amani didn't tell anyone what happened in class. She didn't complain to her mother, didn't talk to her friends, didn't write anything in her journal. She simply packed her bag, kept her head down, and walked across the schoolyard as she did every day. But what no one saw was that each step she took that day felt heavier, not because of shame, but because she was carrying something bigger, a determination wrapped in silence. Amani's silence did not come from fear. It came from self-respect. Some children from a very young age learn how to stay calm in the face of injustice, not because they don't feel anything, but because they understand that emotions are best released at the right moment. For Amani, that day was not the time to speak. It was the time to listen, to remember, and to begin. Many people confuse silence with weakness. They assume that if someone doesn't react, doesn't speak up, then they've surrendered. But in truth, those who remain silent are often the ones preparing the most carefully for their next step. And for Amani, the next step began in the simplest place, the school library. She sat in a small corner, sunlight filtering softly through the curtain onto the page. On the table were three advanced math books, a notebook, and a worn-down pencil. She didn't have a tablet, no private tutor, no advantage other than her patience and the belief that she could figure it out. An elderly librarian noticed Amani coming in every afternoon. She didn't ask any questions. She just quietly placed a warm cup of milk beside her on cold days. And once she said, "You don't have to say anything, sweetheart. The strongest people usually don't." That sentence planted another seed of confidence in Amani. And it wasn't just Amani. History has recorded many people who turned silence into the strongest voice. Ruby Bridges, the 6-year-old girl who first walked into an all-white elementary school in New Orleans in 1960. She said nothing as she was cursed and threatened. She just kept walking, step by step, day by day into American history. Or Rosa Parks, who didn't scream, didn't protest, she simply refused to stand up. And that silent moment sparked a massive movement for liberation. Amani may not have known all of this, but instinctively she understood that some battles don't need noise. They just need endurance. And the most magical thing about humility is that it focuses people on action instead of performance. It allows you to grow quietly while others still think you're not capable. That is the deepest kind of strength, the kind that remains calm in a world that's too loud and too rushed. Amani spent the entire evening puzzling over the math problem, not to prove anything to her teacher, but to prove to herself that she didn't need anyone to define her worth. She could build it herself with effort, with intellect, and with a silence full of strength. That night, as the streetlight cast its glow through the small window where Amani sat, the problem still lay on the desk. She had read it dozens of times. And for the first time, instead of seeing it as impossible, she began to recognize the patterns hidden beneath its tangled numbers. The problem was a multi-step equation involving fractions, absolute values, and embedded logic operations. It was undoubtedly a challenge for a sixth grader. But for someone familiar with advanced test formats, it was solvable as long as the solver had enough patience and analytical thinking. And that's when Amani realized this problem wasn't just a test of mathematics. It was a test, not of calculation ability, but of endurance, belief, and her place in that classroom. Because if the teacher truly wanted to challenge a student, he wouldn't have picked a quiet girl who had never been given access to advanced training. If he truly wanted to assess reasoning, he wouldn't have thrown the hardest problem with a smirk and a doubtful stare. He wasn't testing her math skills. He was testing whether she would accept the role he had assigned her. It was no longer a math problem. It was a message disguised as one. For a long time now in classrooms all over America, there has been talk of a concept called expectation bias. Teachers often unconsciously tend to have lower expectations for students of color or those from minority communities. And the saddest part is low expectations lead to lower outcomes, not because the students are less capable, but because they are not given the same opportunities to grow as their peers. A study from Yale University once showed that even preschool teachers tend to pay more attention to the disruptive behavior of Black boys, even when those boys did not break the rules more than other children. Bias is not a scream. It's the first glance. The seemingly harmless comments. The way a math problem is assigned to the wrong student at the wrong time. Amani did nothing wrong. She just walked into a classroom where no one expected her intelligence to exist. But the lesson here isn't just for Amani, it's for all of us, those who have ever judged someone based on appearance, voice, or background. We may not throw a difficult math problem at someone to test them, but we have all at some point thought they couldn't do it, and that thought is the greatest barrier of all. Amani understood the math problem, but she understood something greater. This wasn't the time to just solve for numbers. This was the time to solve for bias. The apartment where Amani lived wasn't spacious. She and her mother shared a small bedroom, and her study desk was just an old wooden table pushed up against the window. The desk lamp wasn't very bright, but it was enough to light up the pencil-marked pages. The room was quiet, filled only with the ticking of the clock and the soft scratch of pencil on paper. While many other children were already fast asleep, Amani kept working. She wasn't doing this for grades, not to impress her teacher. She was doing it for something deeper, for the need to prove to herself that she could do it, that the math problem wasn't bigger than her worth. At first, everything was tangled. The parentheses in the equations forced her to go back and forth between steps. There were moments when she considered putting down her pencil, but then she remembered the mocking eyes of some classmates, and especially the voice of Mr. B. Low, but chilling, I wouldn't worry too much. This one's not for everyone. It was that sentence that brought her back to the desk to grab a new sheet of paper and start again. She drew diagrams, tried different approaches. Beneath the dim lamp surrounded by darkness, Amani was creating a small revolution, not with slogans, not with shouting, but with each deliberate calculation and clear line of reasoning. With every correct step, she underlined it in red pencil. And as the solution began to reveal itself more clearly, her lips curved into a small smile. Not the smile of victory, but of someone who had just confirmed something important. I actually understand this. Amani didn't have a tutor, but she had a mother who always quietly supported her from behind. When her mother entered the room and saw her daughter still working near midnight, she simply laid an extra blanket over her shoulders and placed a warm cup of milk next to her. "Don't forget to get some sleep, sweetheart, but I believe you'll figure it out." Not everyone grows up with encouragement like that, and not every child learns to believe in themselves overnight. But Amani had begun quietly and steadily. There's a truth rarely mentioned: the greatest revolutions often begin in the smallest of places, not in a square, not in a government building, but in the heart of a child under a desk lamp with a pencil and a silence deep enough to nourish strength. The lesson here wasn't in the final answer to the problem. It was in the process Amani chose to follow in pursuit of that answer. She didn't choose anger. She didn't walk away. She chose intellectual effort. She chose to learn not to take revenge, but to stand tall. The next morning when Amani walked into class, she looked the same as always. Still wearing the old beige sweater, still with the small hair ties at the back of her head, still walking with a quiet, unhurried stride that didn't draw attention. But something was different. There was a depth in her eyes, a steadiness that only those who've come to understand themselves possess. The class was as noisy as any other morning. The boys at the front of the room joked around. Some students were scrambling to finish homework. Mr. B sat at his desk, flipping through the gradebook, seemingly unaware. Amani walked up to him quietly, a neatly folded sheet of paper in her hand. "Sir, I'd like to try that math problem again." Mr. B looked up surprised. The class froze for a moment. Then whispers spread. "Again, really, she's so stubborn. I thought she gave up already." But Amani didn't flinch. She walked to the board, unfolded the paper, and began writing. At first, no one paid much attention. But as the first few lines appeared clean, precise, clearly structured, curiosity began to replace the laughter. She didn't just solve the problem. She solved it in a way that made each transformation easy to follow and understand. Even at the most difficult step, she had left a small red pencil note. Explanation: this is the step converting the inequality system into the conditions for solution existence. No one said a word. Even Mr. B, the same man who confidently declared this problem was not for everyone, stood still, watching silently. Minutes passed. When Amani wrote the final line, the whole class seemed to hold its breath. Then she put down the chalk and turned to the teacher, not with arrogance, not with defiance, but with a gaze so silent, yet stronger than any words. A boy sitting near the board whispered, "She did it." And like a domino effect, the atmosphere in the room changed. The silence wasn't awkward or skeptical anymore. It was recognition. A kind of respect that no one had thought she deserved before, but now in this moment, they knew she had earned. Amani returned to her seat. No applause, no cheers. But everyone knew the girl had just won. The victory wasn't just because she solved the problem. It was because she had done something that most adults would hesitate to do. She returned to the place where she had been humiliated and proved herself through real ability. The lesson here is simple but profound. Sometimes to respond to an insult, you don't need to get angry or shout. You just need to do the thing others thought you couldn't. And when you do, the whole room will fall silent, not because they like you, but because they no longer have a reason to doubt you. But just when Amani thought everything was over, a single sentence from the teacher changed the atmosphere completely. A sentence no one expected. And from that moment on, the story took a turn harsher, deeper, and almost unbelievable. Mr. B stood silently staring at the board, a full page of clear, coherent solutions without a single mistake. He didn't speak for the first few seconds. His hand lightly gripped the gradebook, his eyes seeming to weigh two paths: to accept the truth or to protect the pride of someone who always believed he was right. The class remained silent. Everyone waited for his acknowledgement. But instead of a nod, instead of a word of praise, Mr. B narrowed his eyes and said, "You didn't do this by yourself. Someone helped you." The air froze. Amani stood still, not shocked, not angry, as if she had already anticipated it. But everyone listening could feel the sting of disappointment. That accusation with no proof carried a bitterness far greater than not being recognized. Mr. B would rather believe Amani had cheated than believe she was smart enough to do it on her own. The truth is, in many classrooms, when a student of color achieves something remarkable, the first reaction is not encouragement, but suspicion. They must prove more, try harder, and are still often not trusted like other students. Amani looked at him not with resentment, but with calm. Then she replied softly, like a breath, "I didn't cheat, sir. I just did what you thought I couldn't." It wasn't defiance, it was truth. And when truth is spoken in a steady tone, it carries more weight than any criticism. The whole class looked at Mr. B. A few students began to shift how they looked at Amani, no longer with curiosity or pity, but with respect. Even those who had laughed at her before seemed unsure because Amani's calm and humility now made them feel small. Mr. B didn't respond. He just lowered his head to his desk and pretended to write. But in that silence, everyone knew he had lost a confrontation that never needed a single shout. Sometimes truth doesn't make people change immediately. It simply reorders things quietly, not by tearing anyone down, but by lifting up those who deserve to be seen. And that is the lesson for all of us. When pride grows too large, it blinds us to the truth, causing us to cover it up instead of learning from it. But if we're willing to listen, truth is the most patient teacher of all, even when it comes from a child. And from that moment of denial, Amani's story began to extend beyond the four walls of the classroom. Because something no one foresaw had happened, someone in that class had recorded the entire moment. And just a few hours later, the world outside began to speak up. In the corner of the classroom near the window, a student sat quietly, phone resting below the desk, aimed directly at the board. No one noticed. No one knew that this 1-minute video capturing Amani as she stood up for the truth was about to draw the world's attention. Just hours after class ended, the clip was uploaded to social media with a simple caption: "This girl just made the whole class go silent, and the teacher couldn't handle it." In the video, you could clearly see Amani's step-by-step solution the moment Mr. B questioned her, and her unexpectedly calm response: "I just did what you thought I couldn't. No effects, no performance." The truth was enough to move people. At first, it was a few hundred views, then thousands. Within 24 hours, the video had surpassed 1 million views. Hashtags like Chordiki, She Did It, Nina, Believe Black Girls, and Math Justice flooded Twitter and TikTok. Online news outlets began reporting the story. Educational experts, racial equality advocates, and parents alike shared the video along with emotional commentary. This isn't just about a math problem. It's about how we see the potential of a child. My daughter went through the same thing. Thank you, Amani, for giving her someone to look up to. The school Amani attended received hundreds of emails, letters of concern, and demands for an investigation into the teacher's discriminatory behavior. A disciplinary board was convened. The teacher had to face the one question he had long avoided: why didn't you believe a student of color could be capable? But what was more powerful than anything else was how the community rallied behind a child no one had heard of before. They didn't stand up for her because she was a victim. They stood up because she had become a symbol, not through rebellion, but through dignity. Amani made no public statement. She didn't open a social media account, didn't accept interview requests. She still went to school as usual, still sat at the back of the class, still completed her assignments with care every day. But everyone knew everything had changed, Because once the truth is handed a microphone, it doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be heard. The lesson here is simple but powerful. The silence of those who are underestimated when amplified by fairness becomes the voice that society must hear. Amani is a special girl that's undeniable. But what makes her story so powerful is not that she's exceptional. It's that she represents something much larger. After Amani's video went viral, hundreds of similar stories began to emerge. Parents, students, even former teachers spoke out about times when students of color received lower grades, even when their answers were correct. About seemingly harmless comments that planted seeds of doubt. About enrichment opportunities denied simply because they didn't seem like the right fit. A study from the U.S. National Institute of Education once revealed that students of color, particularly Black and Latinx students, were less likely to be recommended for advanced learning programs, even when their test scores and performance were equal to or higher than their peers. This wasn't about ability, it was about unconscious expectations, those small creeping biases hiding in a glance and a question's phrasing in the choice of who gets the chance. And that is what's truly frightening when a system doesn't need to shout in order to exclude someone. All it has to do is not see them. Amani forced us to look, but she wasn't the only one who had suffered. Across classrooms all over this country, there are countless children sitting quietly in the back rows carrying potential that has never been named. Maybe it's the boy who always smiles but is never picked to lead a group. Maybe it's the girl who writes beautiful stories but has never been entered in a contest because she still needs more time. Maybe it's you or someone, you know someone who was once told, that might be a bit too much for you. And that's why Amani's story doesn't just move us. It challenges us to reflect. Are we, without even realizing, contributing to that silence? By not believing, by not giving a chance, by not speaking up. A classroom doesn't just teach addition and subtraction. It teaches children how to see their own worth. And when prejudice is passed along invisibly through the curriculum, the only lesson some kids learn is that they're never enough. It takes more than one girl to break bias, but it only takes one person who believes to spark a journey of change. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or made to wonder, am I really good enough? Then Amani's victory is your victory too. Because every one of us has been Amani at some point. Maybe it was when you raised your hand and no one listened. When you pitched a good idea and someone else got the credit because they looked the part. Or when you tried to prove your abilities, but all you got in return was doubt. You don't need to be standing at a blackboard solving a tough equation to understand that kind of loneliness. It happens in meetings, in universities, and families, even in the quiet corners of your own mind, when you begin to ask, maybe I'm just not good enough after all. But Amani didn't just solve a math problem. She solved a bias that had stopped so many before her. And in doing so, she became a symbol for everyone who's ever been told you can't. An older man left a comment beneath Amani's video that read, I'm 64 years old. I dropped out of school because no one believed I could ever achieve anything. But today I watched this video and thought, maybe if someone had believed in me when I was 11, my life would have been different. And so Amani's story doesn't end in a small classroom or with a stubborn teacher. It expands into a reminder for each of us that as long as you don't give up, recognition will come, maybe late, but more meaningful than any applause. And in the same way, if you're on a path that no one understands, if you're pushing through step by step in silence, remember this: great victories aren't always loud. Sometimes they come in silence, but their echoes last a lifetime. So keep writing your own solution, even if no one sees it yet, even if no one acknowledges it, because someday that quiet effort might become the light that guides someone else. We've seen what happened when Amani chose not to remain silent. But let's pause for a moment and ask the opposite. What would have happened if she didn't return to the board? If she lowered her head and accepted that the problem wasn't meant for her? If her silence had come not as a strategy of humility, but as an act of surrender? The answer is simple, but also sad. No one would have known how intelligent she truly was. No one would have questioned how the system treated her. No one would have started asking about all the other children being misjudged every day. A moment of silence, when born out of fear, can cause the world to stay quiet forever. And the truth is, there are thousands of Amanis out there, children who chose silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because there were too many times when they tried to speak and no one listened. And slowly they began to believe their voice wasn't worth hearing anymore. In a classroom, silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's the sound of dreams being held back, of confidence being stolen, of talent never being revealed. And that is the real cost of giving up, not just the loss of one opportunity, but the absence of a role model, a guide, a symbol for the next generation. Amani didn't stay silent. She came back, stood up, and answered. And because of that, she reclaimed her voice and opened the way for others to find theirs. Her story didn't change everything, but it was the first step. And sometimes a single brave step can create a path that never existed before. The final lesson isn't that you have to win in order to prove you're worthy. The lesson is that you have to show up, dare to step forward, dare to try, dare to believe. Because if you give up, no one will ever know you were strong enough to change the outcome. Thank you for walking this journey with Amani. And if somewhere inside you is a math problem someone once told you you couldn't solve, remember this. The silence of others does not define your worth, only your own actions do. You have the power to change the story. And who knows? Just like Amani, all it might take is one moment to rewrite how the world sees you and how it sees itself. Maybe you're watching this video from a quiet place on a bus in your office, or at the end of a long and tiring day. But no matter where you are, Amani's story has come to you not just to inspire, but to remind you your value does not lie in how others see you. It lies in how you see yourself. If you've ever been underestimated, ignored, or ever asked yourself, am I really good enough? Let this story be your mirror. Not because Amani is extraordinary, but because she was brave enough not to let prejudice determine her future. And now if you know someone, a child, a friend, a coworker, who needs to hear this message, please share this video with them. If you've ever been your own version of Amani, leave a comment below. Maybe your story will become the support someone else needs right now. Don't forget to click subscribe to keep following real powerful stories about people, about courage, and about the moments that change lives forever. Because who knows, the next video might just be your story. We already know what happened when Amani chose not to stay silent. But now let's ask the deeper question. What if she had stayed silent? What if she hadn't returned to the board that day? What if she had accepted that the math problem wasn't meant for her? What if her silence wasn't strategic humility, but quiet surrender? The answer is sobering. No one would have known how smart she truly was. No one would have questioned how the system had treated her. No one would have started asking how many other children are misjudged every single day. One moment of silence, when rooted in fear, can leave the world in permanent silence. And the heartbreaking truth is this: there are thousands of Amanis out there. Children who have chosen silence, not because they have nothing to say, but because they've spoken up too many times only to be ignored. And eventually they begin to believe that their voice isn't worth hearing. In a classroom, silence is not always serenity. Sometimes it's the sound of a dream being stifled, a confidence being chipped away, a talent that will never surface. And that is the true cost of giving up not just a missed personal opportunity, but a void left behind for the next generation. A space that could have held a role model, a guide, a symbol. Amani chose not to be silent. She came back. She stood up. She answered. And in doing so, she didn't just reclaim her voice, she unlocked the voices of others. Her story may not have changed the entire world, but it marked the very first step. And sometimes a single first step, when brave enough, can build a road where no road existed before.